Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fat Muscle Project podcast. I'm John Gorman, your host. We got Lisa Franz back in the house. Lisa, what's going on? How are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm back in Bolivia. I've settled back into a bit of a routine and yeah, just loving life and excited for this episode today.
Yeah, you and I are both we're geeking out because we know we've wanted to have Brandon on for months now since you first met him at the Fat Muscle Academy back in March. And I've known him. He's one of my partners at Premier U, and we're going to get to him in a second and introduce him. Just this is going to be such a great podcast. Real quick, let's catch everybody up. So you are back in the central time zone, so it's not going to be getting dark on you while we record this. You're back from Germany.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, are you put for a while? Do you have any
Yes,
trips
well,
coming up?
I have a quick trip up to New York in a few weeks actually, just for a short conference. And then in October, I've got some travel to Costa Rica coming up. But apart from that, I'm gonna be based here at least for the rest of the year.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah. And then I
You've
know just
done
with
some
me,
travel on your own as well, just recently.
yeah, we just got back from CrossFit Games where Leslie competed, and I don't want to get into a lot of detail there because we're going to have her on and we're trying to get her coach on, Coach Mike. And that was really cool with me not being a CrossFitter, being a complete bodybuilding bro. That was cool for me just to stand back and watch through my eyes a completely different world. And I can't wait to break that down on a podcast. So stay tuned for that. And then of course it's Labor Day weekend just finished up. We took little Gigi to our first indoor water park, and that is probably the highlight of the year for me. Just seeing her little eyes light up. She's 1 year and like 3 months old. So like little travel down to Branson, just good times. But yeah, we've got some good podcasts coming up. So let's get to our guests. Let's get to Dr. Brandon Williams. Brandon, first of all, welcome to the show, man. How are you?
Well, thank you. It's awesome. I love it. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I know that I want to tell everyone how I met you real quick. And then if you would just give people an intro to who you are and what you do, because your story is pretty cool. But so I met Brandon, first of all, back when I started doing the same thing. If you've listened to our podcast with nurse practitioner Jordan, I met Brandon right around the same time. They had me up to do a guest panel at the M Factor Menopause event up in the Belleville, Swansea area in Illinois, just outside of St. Louis. And that's where I got to meet Brandon, our other partner, Greg, and Jordan, and everyone. And we just hit it off and we started talking about physique enhancement and blood work and fixing hormones. And I quickly learned, okay, these are my people. These are my type of people. They're super fascinated with learning. And then I also found out there's a whole other level I get to learn from people like Brandon and Jordan and Greg. And that's how I got to know them. And then fast forward, we started Premier U Telemed, and that's our clinic. And that's where we see people across Missouri, Illinois, Texas, Florida, now Arkansas, soon to be Oklahoma. And meeting Brandon, I found another Brandon's probably the most Brandon, you're gonna love this. Probably the smartest bro that I know, right? He's extremely smart, educated, and can melt your brain with facts, but he's also extremely jacked. Now, I say that because that's important in our world because that's street cred. You don't have someone just out there lecturing, you have someone that lives this. So that's how I met Brandon. Brandon, if you would try and top that intro if you could and talk a little bit about yourself. See if you can do better than what I just did and give yourself some
Sure.
props.
Well, I'm not going to try to compete with you. I'll give you that for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I will say, yeah, I'll intro myself, but I want to throw this back. And, it's been very interesting for me as somebody who's I've understood diet and nutrition to a certain degree, not to the level that you do, that you and Lisa do, and that you live it. And, wanted to incorporate it for myself. But in medicine, that is not, I mean, everybody hears this, but it's totally true. As somebody who's lived in medicine for years, is that medicine does not regard this, and it is dismissed. And obviously, that facet of it is so important. And just like you've learned from us, we've learned from you. We were just talking about you and the things that you've brought to us just this morning at one of our meetings. So that's been really awesome to see. How do we meld these things together? How do we bring very high level medicine along with really what coaches do, what the trainers do, this idea of lifting and sleeping and eating properly. Those three things, which are obviously sound simple, they're not, but they are so very important. So that's been really awesome. And I guess that's a good segue to talk about. So my history is I say I'm a lifelong athlete. I want to be able to run and jump and be on the trampoline with my grandkids one of these days. Um, so that's very important to me. And I was a chiropractor first, undergrad degrees in biology. Knew I wanted to be in medicine. I became a chiropractor and practiced for several years. At the same time, I did research at WashU. I started out in something called pharmacogenomics, which has to do with looking at genes and how they influence pharmacodynamics of pharmaceuticals. Moved into orthopedics research and was a clinical imaging specialist there, which was awesome. And then decided I wanted to be in medicine full time. Went back to school, to PA school, and neuroscience is something that's very important to me and something I'm particularly inclined to. And I worked in neurosurgery for about a decade, but always kept that regenerative mindset, this sort of holistic look of patients. In a standard medical model, that's very hard to carry forward. I would do the best that I could, but it's being in a hospital setting does not lean itself particularly well to looking at patients holistically. It's very limited, and the teaching is very limited, which I wanted to break outside of it, which is why we started what we started with Premier U.
Yeah, it's one thing also I want to point out. You oversee my care and you oversee the care of a lot of my athletes, you and Jordan both. So if people are listening and they're wondering, hey, can Brandon be my healthcare provider? For sure. We're gonna have all that information in the show notes and how to contact Brandon or get set up. So that's very important to know. People that know me that listen to this podcast know I don't say that in any light sense at all. Like whenever Brandon's taking care of me personally, that really means a lot. So Brandon, I want to jump in and kick this off since we're talking about peptides. One of the first things, because a lot of our listeners are just not going to be super experienced,
Mm.
especially in the bro world, right? The bodybuilding world that I come from. A lot of people they always wonder, so why take peptides if there's growth hormone available? So if you don't mind talking about the importance of peptides, and then also on the honest part of growth hormone, at least from the bodybuilding worlds, on the black markets, most of it's fake. So if you don't mind touching on those two types of things, the differences and what people need to know about like legit growth hormone.
Sure. Yeah, I love it. I love the question. So to talk about peptides first. So really peptides is somewhat fits a definition. So it's a sequence of amino acids, the tiny little building blocks that comprise proteins ultimately. But peptides are up to 50 of those combined together, so up to 49. That's really just the definition. But the biggest part about peptides is those are things that your body knows how to recognize and more importantly knows how to utilize. It's something that it makes. So many of these things, and some of them we're going to talk about today, are things that our body already makes. They've just been optimized and given back to you in a potentiated format to have a little bit more impact in certain key ways. And those are like if you look at like growth hormone, this is, and I'm going to give a predicate to what we'll talk about is it's sort of a difference between, like you said, like the bros, right? If your job, or excuse me, if your goal is to gain as much muscle mass as you can and to grow and to get really big, there is nothing better than exogenous growth hormone. And the big part of that and the difference between that versus like the secretagogues or the peptide versions that we'll talk about is they drive different mechanisms. So in thinking about exogenous growth hormone, there are actually 100 isoforms, so different versions of growth hormone that our bodies produce. There's two main forms, and the other 98 are very small constituents. But the exogenous growth hormone is one of those isoforms. It's something called 22 kilodalton. Not that you'll have to remember, but it does matter for testing. When you ask somebody's body to make more growth hormone, which is how the peptides or the secretagogues work, you're asking them to make all 100 isoforms. So we all know somebody who's developed insulin resistance. They've had liver consequences. Their glucose goes up and their cortisol starts to have a problem from exogenous growth hormone. And it is
Yeah.
because that version is extremely anabolic. It is driving that system really hard. That's why it makes you big. It's great at that. It drives something called mTOR. Just to talk about that for a second, like that word gets thrown around. It's very good for anabolism. But what it also promotes is that insulin resistance version. It's this problem. It's sort of like having the checks without the balances. Versus if you take a peptide format, yes, it's not going to have the same growth hormone release that you would see from an exogenous. Like if you're taking exogenous growth hormone, you're taking 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 IUs of that in something that you're taking to ask your body to make more. You're getting, probably 1.5 to 2 IUs at very most. Can be
Mm,
very impactful, but you're also getting that protection on the other side. So it's in context of what's your goal. If your goal is to be a monster, to be huge and really big, which, like that there's a merit to that, right? Then there's a more appropriate tool. If your goal is to have a little bit more of that health span, to build some muscle, to have some longevity with regard to muscle span, those peptides and secretagogues have a little bit of a better role.
yeah, I would say most of our listeners are not trying to be 250 pounds on stage. That's a very rare listenership. It's a very niche person out there. I think most of our people just want to be as lean and muscular as they can with longevity. It really the basis of everything. Growth hormone, the cost of growth hormone, if you don't mind talking about that, because I think to me it's all expensive, relatively speaking, if you compare to some of the other things out there. So I know real growth hormone's super expensive. Am I correct on that?
Yes, very much. I mean, if you're wanting to take, let's say 3 IUs, that is probably going to run you about 6 to 8 grand a month for
Wow.
the real deal. Yeah. I mean, so very impactful, has a huge benefit. It's why a lot of people they'll spend 8 to 10 grand a month just in growth alone.
Yeah. And I know that, a lot of times most of that stuff's bunk. It's fake out there if you're getting it black market. I mean, it just I hate that side of the business, of the industry, not the business. I hate that side. But now regular peptides, if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about quote unquote research companies versus legit prescriptions, because there's a lot of these research companies out there. One just got shut down. I can't remember the exact name. It was amino something or other, right? And it seems like there's issues every other year with these companies. I'm not going to lie. I've used some injectable carnitine from a couple of them in the past, before I had access to things like I do now, or I just didn't know. The carnitine smelled like fish. And one time the NAD that I got left lumps in my ass that are still there. So I am really a big proponent of not using these companies because you don't get testing on them, COAs. You don't see any of that. So in the supplement world where we're from, you wouldn't use supplements that are people that are making behind the scenes without any testing. So why would you use research-based company peptides? That to me is the exact same thing. All of the fat muscle products, like we have these things tested and it's super anal. If we ever came out with something that wasn't tested or was quote unquote research, people would blast us. Yet they'll take
Sure.
peptides. I don't get, or black market testosterone. I'll get off my soapbox. If you don't mind, do you have anything to add there with legit prescriptions versus the research side?
Yeah. I mean, you said it. It's knowing, well, A, the sterility, because that's been an issue. Obviously, if anything that you're injecting in your body, in my opinion, you obviously have to be very careful with. The risk of infection with that is significant, but also the dosing. There's numerous things like methylene blue. People talk about that and the stuff that they get off of Amazon. One of the biggest issues with that, in addition to like the other components that there's maybe heavy metals in there, is that it might say that it's 30 milligrams, but instead you're actually getting 300 milligrams of that. And that same thing is true for these other peptides. Usually it's on the lower end. They're going to give you extra stuff, but it may just not be as potent. The dosing tends to be very irregular. You'll see that a lot of times anecdotally as somebody who uses pharmaceutical grade and prescribes pharmaceutical grade. The doses that I have to prescribe, that I do prescribe, are very different than when people take it from a lot of these peptide places because the potency is just not the same. And the consistency is not the same. You may have a good batch that is really good. You may have it 3 times, and then that fourth time, the potency is just not there. The quality is just not the same.
Yeah, 2 years ago, I had a client that was using terzepatide back when it was relatively new,
Mhm.
and a couple of my clients were getting it from their docs. It blunted hunger. It did everything that good terzepatide does. And then from one of these other research places, this other client got it. It didn't blunt hunger. It didn't do anything, which told me it was fake. And it's kind of like when people use black market testosterone. I know guys in the past that have used 500 milligrams a week because it's so watered down. Like if you had regular prescription grade testosterone, used 500, there's no way, there's no way you could do that. So,
Yeah.
Can
but
I
the
throw in a
sterility,
question, which might
yeah, yeah.
potentially be stupid, but we've just compared peptides versus growth hormone, and I'm curious to hear like where does testosterone fit into this? So like if someone's listening to this and like, yes, I want to be the most jacked, I will, but also with longevity aspects and stuff, why would I go for the testosterone as opposed to peptide, as opposed to the growth hormone?
That's a great question, and it's actually the answer is going to be complicated. So I'll try not to go off on too many facets, or excuse me, too many tangents. But so I'll say it like this: with anything, there are these base things that have to be handled. We talked about the diet, exercise, and the sleep. Those have to be in place. The reality is, if those three are not in place, then don't utilize peptides either, because you're really going to be wasting your money. You're going to be injecting something that's not going to work quite as well. Now, there are caveats to that where we will use those things to help you be able to sleep better, for instance, or to be able to exercise a little bit better. Like if somebody's having a really, like I treat a lot of musculoskeletal problems. So will I roll them in? But to throw stacks on somebody who are not optimized in the other ways, it's not going to be as effective and it'll be really costly ultimately. Um, the other part of it is, so I see hormones as a vital part of, like you think of, I say this a lot, and it's an interesting question of what does it mean to age? And everybody talks about longevity, and the reality is what we want is health span, right? I want to live to be 92, but be active that whole time. I don't want to be 120 and be like debilitated for 30 years. Um, Aging really is what that means is that you're losing resilience. You're losing cellular resistance. You're losing metabolic flexibility. You're having these losses of your cell's ability to adapt to stressors. That's my definition of aging. And so hormones lead to that. The loss of those hormones lead to that problem, right? Like vis-a-vis menopause, for instance, which is a very classic example, or the andropause, the loss of testosterone for men and women. There's also the loss of growth hormone, which I'd love to talk a little bit more about, which happens to really coincide with the precipitous drop of estrogen that happens in perimenopause and right before menopause. Like you had Dr. Campbell on, who I just loved that podcast. I love him, by the way, so shout out to Bill. He's the man. But that SWAN study that he described with the significant anabolic resistance that develops and the large amount of adipose gain that happens, that divergence that happens for those patients, that happens to also coincide with growth hormone loss as that estrogen drops. And the same thing happens for men to a different degree and maybe at a different time. But really, those things have to be looked at. Where I look at peptides as far as things like BPC 157, thymosin beta 4. Some of these other things that get put on for a reason. You're taking that to do something and then you move on, potentially. But hormones, with like, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone for females, growth hormone as well. And then for guys, testosterone, growth hormone, also progesterone though, and then making sure that their estrogen's balanced. Those are those sort of things that need to be there for that verve, that life to give you juice, basically. That's where so many of these processes, like they're so pivotal, that those have to be and those have to be supported
Mhm.
in whatever way so that these other things can work also. If that answered your
Yeah,
question.
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and dive into some of these peptides. Brandon, I want to start off with, and by the way, Brandon picked these because these are the ones that he wanted to start off with. And I also want to preface this by saying Brandon will be on numerous times. We'll probably do other things, Q&As on some other topics, some other peptides. and he'll also be presenting at the Fat Muscle Academy 10-year anniversary coming next summer. So just to kind of preface this all with, this is not the only time we're going to talk about this. So we will have more content coming. Let's start with BPC 157, Brandon. I think in my world with my clients, it's the one I get asked about the most.
Sure.
And I think about, Leslie, a lot of bodybuilders on my end, a lot of functional athletes like CrossFitters on Leslie's end. I know there's a lot of people from her CrossFit gym that are going to listen to this podcast. They all
Mhm.
want to know about BPC 157. So if you don't mind, let's start with that one.
Sure, I love it. And I like the intro, John, because John knows me well enough to know that if he doesn't put parameters on me, then I'll just keep talking. Um, yeah, so the BPC, I definitely wanted to talk about that because really we could go forever about how impactful it is, which is why everybody talks about it all the time. So in a simplistic way, if you think about BPC 157, it's something that our body makes. So that BPC stands for body protection compound. The 157 was an optimized version. It's actually something that every time we eat, our stomach produces just a little bit of to repair our intestinal lining. So it's a substance that our body, again, recognizes and knows exactly what to do with. If you talk about its use in the use cases, they come down to really two distinct, somewhat distinct categories. So there's the gut related. So somebody who needs to go through gut repair, the gut being so pivotal in overall health and the microbiome. And thankfully, medicine's starting to catch up with that a little bit. And they're starting to talk about it. But the gut health part is just, it's undeniable. But BPC has an inherent role with healing our gut and bringing down inflammation. Uh, it does similar things systemically. So the injectable version is one that it works more systemically. It will also work on the gut, but it'll also work on your supraspinatus tendon, for instance, or if you sprain your ankle. Um, Usually historically the orals, BPC, it only works on the gut. There is one caveat to that. There is a product made by a company called Healthgevity that we use that has something called SNAC, SNAC, that does give it some systemic absorption to about the rate of 48% bioavailability. So at least you get some. It's way better than even my pharmaceutical grade BPC that I give people. That really absorbs not at all.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you're using it for. But in the how it works, it upregulates something called vascular endothelial growth factor. That's one of the major ways that it works. So it brings blood flow. If you think about, like, let's just pick a tendon or a ligament, those do not have great blood supply, which is like if you've ever sprained your ankle, you know that sucker takes weeks and weeks and weeks to sometimes a few months, depending on if it's a high ankle sprain. That'll take you 3 months to get better.
Yeah.
Whereas if you break a bone, that thing is healed in 3 or 4 weeks. That bone is put back together and it comes down to blood supply. BPC promotes angiogenesis, so it brings new blood vessels to that area, whether it be an old injury or a new injury. And in addition to that, so it's bringing those recruitment factors, all of the healing factors, the fibroblasts, the stem cells, everything that you need to repair that. And at the same time, it's promoting what I like to think of as the lattice work on which those cells can work, right? So if you're going to put things back together, there has to be a stable base on which those cells can literally crawl over those spaces and fill those gap junctions and repair those collagen fibers. And so it promotes those activities as well. In addition to promoting the cell's ability to move across those spaces, it's bringing down inflammation. So really a comprehensive control mechanism for the repair. And not only that, but it also tells the body, it helps to control switches for when to stop. That's really important because in medicine with treatment, so many really cool things have come out, but what they had a problem with is controlling the good. And too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. And so what ends up happening from a soft tissue perspective is if healing occurs for too long and too aggressively, what you'll develop is scar formation. And that scar formation will tend to then be weak. It'll be crosshatched. It's not going to be linear and strong the way that it should be. So anyway, BPC really checks a lot of different boxes as it relates to this soft tissue healing.
So, I'm thinking of our listeners. What's probably the most common situation outside of gut health, right? The oral side for the gut health proponent of that, which I think is really massive. I think that would help a lot of people, especially the older we get. And we've been eating 200 plus grams of protein for decades now, a lot of us, right? But when it comes to the actual injections, a lot
Yeah.
of people, they're having shoulder issues at this point. They're in their 40s or they're coming back from an injury. What's the most common place that you're prescribing BPC 157?
I would say the shoulder is a very commonplace just because a shoulder injury will take you out.
Yeah.
Um, it's such a mobile joint. It's very susceptible to injury. It's very complicated. Versus like a knee, I'll use it a lot for that because those are the two most common presenting musculoskeletal issues outside of spine, of course. But from an athlete's perspective, it's shoulders and knees very commonly. I mean, that those are the most common, but I can say that any soft tissue related injury is going to respond favorably to this. I mean, its ability to help build muscle is remarkable, particularly if you take somebody who's a little bit more optimized. I have it's an interesting story of somebody who's a competitive football player. He's in the NFL. And I won't give other details about this, but this person was already really optimized and pretty big guy anyway, and ended up putting about 22 pounds of muscle on, and was just very surprised about that. But really, what it did was he was working out hard. He was driving his body, but he was also eating and sleeping, right? So what it allowed him to do was to recover the very important portion of recovering and letting those soft tissues repair from that, that stimulus, that stress that he put on the body. So he was getting that good workout in, but also coming back from it and coming back stronger as a result.
Interesting. A couple follow-up questions that I have real quick. One involves blood pressure. I'll get to that one in a second because of blood flow, and I'm someone that deals with blood pressure. Real quick before I forget, for people like with shoulder injury, does site injection, does it matter? Do you need to inject in the shoulder, or what are your
So
thoughts on that?
yeah, I mean, this is one of those that gets debated. There is some nuanced benefit to site injection. For somebody who, like, I don't want somebody to inject in their joint. So it really just needs to be subcutaneous. So it doesn't have to be per se tissue specific, but regional.
Yeah,
Um, versus if somebody else like can't reach their shoulder or if it's an odd place, they can literally put it right in the subcutaneous tissue in their belly.
gotcha.
Um, so is it beneficial? Yes, there's some nuanced benefit to that. Is it a requirement? No.
Okay. Excellent. And then for someone that's just training, right? Like they're training 5 days a week, they don't have any injuries.
Mhm.
Just the idea of adding this in because muscle tissue is damaged everywhere from training
Right.
if you're training 5 days a week. So just overall improvement with blood flow, muscle gain, like that. As far as like one of the best things that people could do to add muscle, would you put this right up there at the top?
It's incredible. Yes. I mean, its
Yeah.
ability to modulate these processes. And again, there are processes which I can't overstress that your body knows how to recognize this and it interacts with your body in a way that is modulating and improving it versus manipulating it. And so many drugs manipulate our cells. And as a result, they have consequences to them. And sometimes, if you manipulate a cell for a short period of time, like, I won't go off on a soapbox necessarily because it would take a while, but like metformin really has a place, but it does manipulate our cells. And so that's where there is a time and a place for those versus something like a BPC, which is modulating, supporting, and it's underlying, and our bodies know how to recognize and use. And really, there's no toxic level of BPC. There is not an overdose that occurs with that substance. You really would just create expensive urine otherwise, or at a certain point, you're going to lose more benefit, but it's not like it's going to cause you harm.
Gotcha.
Can
Okay.
I
And
can
then
I also throw in
yeah,
another question, which might also be stupid, but essentially any of this BPC 157, etc. If someone is doing a drug tested sport, is
Mhm.
that safe to go or not?
So unfortunately, BPC is on the WADA list.
Okay,
And I did develop testing for it. Yes.
gotcha. Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
in my view, it's interesting. It's one of those like sort of like oh, we know for sure this works. So if you if it becomes banned by WADA, it means that there's very clear evidence to support that it optimizes performance, basically.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And to a lot of our listeners, a lot of my athletes get tested in the natural bodybuilding world, right? Always check the water list. Every double check it, triple check it. It changes like every year something's being added. So like people ask me all the time and I say, well, go check and triple check yourself. So
Right.
it's a great question, Lisa, because a lot of people don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
even for
especially
someone like Leslie just now competing at the CrossFit Games, and so obviously that's probably something she would have had to be aware of as well.
Yep, yep. We looked extensively at that, and obviously she didn't use that. So, real quick before we move on to Mot C, blood pressure. So I was interested whenever I looked up and did some research on this, Brandon. I noticed that it helps improve blood pressure. How significant is that? Is this something? Is it just an added bonus? If it helps drop blood pressure, I mean, it's not something that's going to drop someone's blood pressure too low. I wouldn't imagine.
No. So how it works with that, and it's definitely not a primary, that's not a primary use case. I will think of this as not even secondary, but probably tertiary. But really
Gotcha.
how it's doing that is it's modulating a system called the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or RAS, which
Yeah.
is kidney and lung mediated control of our blood pressure and also electrolyte abnormalities. So angiotensin 2 is a very inflammatory substance. It causes a lot of, so it's part of that system that sets off that cascade that causes your blood pressure to rise in response to stress typically. But
Yeah.
if that's not temporary, what will cause is that angiotensin 2 to develop sort of chronic elevation. BPC is working on mechanisms that modulate that, and that's how it's bringing your blood pressure down. So it's definitely not a blood pressure medicine, but it will support a more normal static blood pressure.
Gotcha. Okay. Really, really interesting stuff. Let's move on to Mot C.
Mhm.
I don't think very many people are even going to understand what this is. Even
Yeah,
when we say Mot C, they may not even know how to spell it. So it's in the show notes. If you guys, everything that we do, it's always in the show notes, our
yeah.
full outline. Brandon, what is Mot C?
I love it. It's one of my favorites. I'll try not to get too excited, but I sort of want to reference so MOTS and the secretagogues back to the question about WADA is that these are things you can do that are not banned.
Hmm.
So they are improvement. So you think about how do I improve how my body functions? You can do this without those consequences, which is nice for those athletes like Leslie, who's been through this recently.
Yeah.
Um, but MOTS, what that is, I won't get too nerdy, although I really want to, is so it belongs to a classification of something called open reading frame. So that has to do with the mitochondria. If you don't know, our mitochondria, yes, the people call it the powerhouse of the cell, but really it does so much more. It really sets what I think of as cellular tone. It's telling our cells how to function. If your mitochondria are healthy, your cells will be healthy. If the inverse is true, then the cells will not be healthy. But our mitochondria have its own DNA, which is maternal DNA. And we produce this substance called MOTS-C, MOTS-C. And I won't go through the big long name, but that gives reference to that open reading frame. This was something that was discovered in 2015. There are three known open reading frames, and this one is very impactful, probably the most impactful that have been found. This really how this works is if you think of in the balance of anabolism and catabolism or building and recovering. You think about it like that. This one I put into that recovery column. So it works on, like we talk about GLPs and how powerful semaglutide, tirzepatide, and retatrutide are. Those work primarily via a mechanism called AMPK, which
Yeah.
is a recovery pathway. It's really a cascade. And MOTS-C activates that same cascade via a different mechanism. There's a folate related mechanism on which it works to activate that cascade. And so what that leads to ultimately, just like with the GLPs, but in a different way, is it's leading to improved beta oxidation. So how do we burn fats? And mobilization of fats from the fat cells, from the adipocytes out into circulation so that they can be utilized through beta oxidation in our cells and used for fuel. Fat is the most efficient fuel source, but it
Yeah.
has to be mobilized and we have to then be able to process it via that beta oxidation. In addition to that, a very major mechanism is that it improves insulin sensitivity. So there's the cascade of like when insulin binds to a cell and the cascade that happens after that. MOTS-c has direct effects on that cascade that improves how well insulin is telling the cell to uptake glucose and utilize it for fuel. But also managing that gets turned off. If you're constantly driving elevated insulin, what's going to happen is your cell is going to go into that build mode constantly. It's going to cause you to store fat, and it's going to cause you to take glucose, the excess glucose, and turn it into fat for
Yeah.
storage or into gluconeogenesis, that other process. But it creates this insulin is really an anabolic substance. So MOTS-c is improving our relationship to insulin. It's also helping with decreasing inflammation. It's got very major inflammation reducing effects throughout the liver, the pancreas, and really muscle cells in general. Those are the three big ones. So it's improving basically all substrate utilization in a very broad way, and it's very safe. And right now, actually, there's a company called Cobar who's studying something called CB4211, which is just essentially optimized MOTS-c. And they are studying it for metabolic associated steatohepatitis. So basically, liver-related metabolic dysfunction with thus far really good results. So anyway, that science is really burgeoning. And just if you look at like the idea of, again, cellular resistance and metabolic flexibility, to use those words again, very powerful agent for that. And again, it's something our body knows how to recognize. It makes it anyway.
Yeah. So this is I'm about to nerd out here myself because this is my wheelhouse when it comes to
Yep.
insulin sensitivity. So now all these things are going off in my mind. To me, it sounds like one hell of a glucose disposal agent, something to help with glucose disposal. But, for people that are insulin resistant, whether it's from high stress or just they've had high insulin for a long time, or it's one of my athletes in the off season that have been eating hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of carbs, that insulin sensitivity lowers over time, or it
Right.
suffers over time. This is going to help your body. It's going to help insulin do its job better, more efficiently, is what I hear you saying. So less insulin is needed to get everything stored and done, which means less fat storage. Or if you're in a deficit, it's going to be easier fat loss. To me, I mean, this sounds like a massive winner. I mean, does that sound accurate to you? Is that what I'm hearing right?
Yes, and it's important to note too that so the idea of insulin resistance does not occur in all cells simultaneously or in the same sequence. It occurs, for instance, insulin resistance begins in the fat cells. That's where it starts. And so if you look at something that has a direct ability to affect those adipocytes, those fat cells, and their insulin resistance, it's going to have positive downstream effects. But fat cells, muscle cells, neuronal cells, hepatic cells or liver cells, they develop insulin resistance at different times. I was sort of raised with this thought, or at least I thought anyway, until I learned better, that it all occurs sort of simultaneously, but it doesn't. And so it's a little bit more nuanced, but being able to leverage that and shift insulin resistance in those cells aggressively will help the entire cascade.
Interesting. Lisa, are there any questions that you can think of over Mont C?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the only question would be, I know you said it's different pathways to trisepatide, etc., but yeah, why would someone choose one or the other specifically, like in certain scenarios?
That's a great question. So if you look at, again, this idea of it partially has to do with how this works. So the semaglutide and tirzepatide, they hit those GLP and then GIP receptors. They are activating AMPK, but they're doing it via a different mechanism. So it has to do with, again, what tissue source is this happening on first? One of the ways that semaglutide and tirzepatide helps is by causing an increase in insulin. So in those patients, in their beta cells, their pancreas, it's asking for them to produce more, and at the same time improving how well those cells work. MOTS-c also has a similar benefit in that it helps to reduce specific what are called cytokines. So you may have heard of things like IL-6 or interleukin-6, interleukin-1 beta, tumor necrosing factor alpha. These very specific and tissue destructive inflammatory cytokines. MOTS-c has a direct inhibition on those agents. So essentially, it's supporting GLP-1 function.
Mm.
So it's helping to support that while helping to crank up that insulin sensitivity portion. Also, to take it a little bit further, so MOTS-c, not only with regard to that, but this is something else that I won't go too far off unless you guys have questions, but with regard to mitochondrial fission and fusion, so essentially the repair that happens in the turnover of our mitochondria, it has direct stabilization for that mitochondrial fusion, meaning that it improves efficiency of our mitochondria. And if you look at semaglutide and tirzepatide, they're improving some mechanisms, but they're also giving us more substrate. So we want to have those mitochondria be as healthy as they can be and as efficient as they can be so they can produce energy to do all the wonderful things that GLPs are doing to us, right? They're providing these substrates to us. Our mitochondria need to be able to, we have to turn that factory on. And it actually, to take that even further, I mentioned metformin before. The primary mechanism of how metformin works is to suppress something called complex 1. Well, MOTS-c does the exact opposite of that. So it repairs that exact mechanism. So if somebody's been on metformin and they have consequences to it, MOTS-c is a direct repair of those inhibitory consequences.
Interesting. So someone that's been on metformin for a long time, your body adapts to that, and you have to, I mean, at some point, like you can only take so much, in my opinion, but your body's getting used to it. So this might be a good addition there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, so metformin again, it activates AMPK2, but how it
Yeah.
does that? So again, it activates that. That's the energy sensor of the cell, meaning
Yeah.
you're in a fasted state, right? That's what AMPK is doing versus mTOR, which is you're in a fed state.
Yeah.
But AMPK and mTOR sort of do this fine dance, and they have to have
Yeah.
tight regulation with each other. But metformin works by inhibiting complex 1. So there's complexes in the electron transport chain. I'll try not to get too nerdy, but that's the very first one. And it works by shutting that mechanism down. So essentially what it's doing is depleting of you of ATP or fuel, right?
Yeah.
Cellular fuel. So it sets off AMPK by this suppression of your electron transport chain. MOTS-c is wanting to do the opposite. It is wanting to improve and stabilize that exact same complex, that complex 1, so that you get better ATP production. And then that way you can also feed your cells so that beta oxidation works better. You have all the other processes. Again, I always think of our cells as a little bit like factories. And you got to have the lights on, the machines have to work. You have to have workers to be there. You have to get deliveries, and you also have to ship the products out. And that's a fine dance that has to occur in homeostasis, essentially.
It sounds like it's almost like like a exercise mimetic. Would that be accurate?
So this is actually what's known as a calorie restriction mimetic. So you're
Yeah.
thinking along the right lines, though. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Very, very interesting. So here's the thing. We've got, how much time do you have, Brandon? Do you have a hard 2 o'clock set, or can we keep
I'm
going?
yours. Yep. No, I'm yours for a while, but
Lisa, are you good? Or do you
Yep,
have a
yep,
hard?
yep.
Okay, because now we're going to jump into, we thought about making this 2 parts, but we're going to go ahead and keep this all in one. Brandon, you wanted to talk about CJC, ipamorelin, tesamorelin, and hexarelin. And I'm just going to turn it over to you. I know there's things you want our listeners to understand about those.
Mhm.
Some of those are very common, and I get asked this all the time. What's the difference? So I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you go.
Awesome. Yeah, I put those three because they are the most major and most well-known and most studied, importantly, of this category of what I'll call secretagogues. They actually work via different mechanisms. We're thinking about, in this case, when we're talking about this is growth hormone mechanisms, but it's a little more complex than that too. Again, when you take exogenous growth hormone, you're driving that one isoform, which is very anabolic and has great effects in that way, but it doesn't have the other isoforms. It's also only stimulating those growth hormone related receptors. So that's an important facet. It goes to the liver, obviously, and then IGF-1 is produced from that as a consequence, and then it does its magic as well. This category of secretagogues, what you're doing is you're asking you're asking your pituitary and even your hypothalamus to increase production of growth hormone. So it's asking your body to make all 100 of those isoforms of growth hormone. In addition to that, some of these, which I'll talk about the nuances, actually directly activate receptors throughout the body to have positive health benefits too. So if you think about ipamorelin was I'm going to put these into two different categories. So there's something called GHRH, which are growth hormone releasing hormones. And then there are the GHRPs, or the growth hormone releasing peptides, as two
Right.
different categories. Okay. That really speaks to which receptor it's impacting. So the growth hormone releasing hormones are going to the front of your pituitary gland in the deep recesses of the brain, and it's asking them to output more growth hormone. Let's take now it's a perfect segue to CJC and ipamorelin. They actually work via two different mechanisms. So the way I think about CJC is it's filling that tank. It's increasing the amount of growth hormone that's available in those anterior pituitary cells. And then what ipamorelin does is it comes in behind it and it gives a greater pulse of those out into the systemic circulation, but it also increases the frequency with which you are releasing growth hormone. And remember, our body's very pulsatile. We produce this mostly at night. It
Yeah.
occurs in an insulin low state or in a fasted state because insulin is directly inhibitory. It activates something called somatostatin, which shuts down those ghrelin receptors and the growth hormone receptors. So
Yeah.
that's why at nighttime, like you don't want to be in a fed state overnight. That's where you get the preponderance of your growth hormone release. And that's how these are often used as well. So you want to take them in a fasted state, or really what it means is that you want your insulin levels to have dropped relative to you, right? Because that's going to be different. Somebody's insulin of 18 may be low for them, where somebody else's insulin may be 4, and that's their low,
Right.
right? So it is relative. Um, so CJC and ipamorelin really hit two different receptors. CJC having different capacity. It's a GHRH. Ipamorelin was the very first growth hormone releasing peptide that was discovered back in the mid to late 90s, actually. And
Okay.
they even, as a result, named a receptor after it. So all of the releasing peptides activate something called growth hormone secretagogue receptor 1A. I only say that to say that it's a very distinct mechanism. It's got activation in parts of the body and tissues outside of just growth hormone itself. Very powerful. It's been studied. Ipamorelin in particular has been studied extensively. One of the issues that I love this combination because as I described, they marry so perfectly together. You're filling that tank and you're increasing the pulse out and the pulse frequency with it, with the CJC and the ipamorelin together. One of the issues is that you will very often see the CJC 1295 is the full name with something called DAC, DAC.
Yeah.
And really what that's doing is it's increasing the half-life from about 30 to 45 minutes of standard CJC to about 6 to 7 days.
Oh, wow.
Here's my issue with it is if you put it in a combo product and you're getting something that should be pulsatile and you're really driving it constantly, what you're going to end up getting out of that is something called receptor involution. So basically your receptors are going to say, whoa, you are way too overstimulating us, and we're going to go away as a result. They're going to
Yeah.
pull away from the ability to be able to activate. So that's one of the issues that I have with a lot of the forms of that. Now, if you can get it without DAC,
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense, and then you can use that on a regular basis. And normally, when I dose these in people, I'll give them, 5 days on and 2 off to give those receptors a little bit of a break.
That makes sense.
Is so making some notes here. It seems like I want to ask a real quick question. With growth hormone, we know insulin sensitivity fades with growth hormone. And in my research, I quickly looked up a couple months ago. Is this one of the peptides that does affect insulin sensitivity? Is it just a little bit? Where are we at with that? Or is that not something people have to worry about with this one?
Yep, that's a great question. I'm glad you said it. So because again, if you look at, like I said, that 22 kilodalton from exogenous growth hormone, the other primary releasing part of endogenous growth hormone, meaning the growth hormone that we make in our bodies, is called 20 kilodalton. It actually directly inhibits those diabetogenic effects, meaning those insulin resistance promoting effects that
Yeah.
the 22 kilodalton causes. So when you're producing this out of your own pituitary, from within your own body, you're producing all of those isoforms. So
Right.
you're not developing those consequences. And in fact, because of growth hormone, how endogenous growth hormone works, you're improving, which when we talk about tesamorelin, we're going to talk about how it really improves insulin sensitivity, but specifically fat loss and lipolysis, and our ability to improve how we utilize substrates.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead and jump into tesamorelin next?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
tesamorelin is one of those that people just love. I mean, its ability to cause body composition changes is very significant. There is a really good growth hormone pulse, and again, endogenous, you're getting all of them. Um, it's one of those agents too, where if you talk about the different types of fat, so there's peripheral fat and then there's visceral fat, right?
Yeah.
So visceral fat being very highly pro-inflammatory, it is a big problem. Tesamorelin in studies on humans, which is important, has been shown to be able to reduce visceral adipose tissue by approximately 18%.
Wow.
A significant reduction,
Wow.
and not something that you see from most of the other ones. It has to do with the pulse waveform that you see. So very impactful there, but also the tissue repair that happens. So it's improving also. So it's taking that visceral fat and improving beta oxidation. So it's getting decreased fat. It's really shifting how your fat cells store and mobilize these fats, which is really remarkable. So there can be significant body composition changes, but again, it's one of those powerful ones from a visceral adipose tissue perspective that just can't go ignored.
Interesting. So what do you think about this one for a fat loss phase or for lean growth? Like where would you see this one fit in with our people that are listening they're trying to be as lean and muscular as they can be? It sounds like this is probably one of the best ones for recomping, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, if you're wanting to drive both lipolysis and lipid utilization for energy, while also providing the positive growth hormone aspects of body composition from muscle building and tissue repair and recovery, this is a remarkable agent for that because it's driving both of those mechanisms.
Lisa, do you have any questions on
Yeah,
tesamorelin?
I do actually. In comparison to like things like triceptide, etc., is there any data in terms of how people sustain their weight loss after that has happened?
There have not been a lot of studies with regard to keeping it off. I mean, obviously that will come. This is one of those interesting ones because growth hormone is something that depletes, endogenous production of it depletes, right? So meaning that as we age, we produce less and less of it, and that causes body composition problems. If somebody if they're doing all of the other right things, if their diet is in play, if they're exercising appropriately, sleeping, and their hormones are optimized in other ways, they're probably going to retain those benefits a little bit better.
Hmm.
That's not dissimilar from the tirzepatide, where really those patients keep those results too
Yeah.
if they've done those other things.
Okay.
That's really the reason why people gain weight back is that they weren't doing those things in the first place,
Mm.
probably. Or in a worst case scenario, they were driven to where they had a lot of muscle loss because it will cause muscle atrophy, particularly at high doses and in a non-trained individual. And as a result, metabolic adaptation changes significantly for those patients where their basal metabolic rate will drop
Hmm.
3 to 700 calories a day. Um, One of the ways that tirzepatide works, actually, just to talk about that, is by protecting that basal metabolic rate drop, that metabolic adaptation that happens during weight loss. It'll take that same person and make their BMR drop maybe 150. So that way that their diet then only has to accommodate that much of a decrease after having lost 50 pounds. Um, but yes, if they don't, you're trying to, in my mind, you're utilizing these agents while talking comprehensively and holistically with these patients.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And then finally, we've got hexarelin. I know absolutely nothing here, so I'm super excited to see what you have to
Yeah.
say about this one.
Yeah. This is actually, so personally, this is my favorite. And the reason for that is, so it lives in that GHRP category. So you may have heard of something called ibutamorin or GHRP 2 or 6, just for your listeners. And basically, this is an optimized version of those where you're getting significant growth hormone pulse without all of the hunger that you might see from the others, but also it is activating, in addition to that growth hormone secretagogue receptor 1A receptor on multiple tissues, you're also activating something called CD36, which is a CD36, not to be confusing too much. Activation of that endogenously causes inflammatory problems. It causes a lot of cardiovascular consequences. So hexarelin binds that receptor and makes it inactive. So what you're doing is shifting, particularly from a cardiovascular perspective, things in a favorable direction. One of the things that about this one, and one of the reasons why it's one of my favorites, is the burgeoning research with regard to cholesterol management and things like lipoprotein A or LP little a. So there's a system in our bodies called reverse cholesterol transport, and it's based off of something in our liver cells. There's a receptor called the liver X receptor. I know I'm going really far off, and I promise I'll get there. Um, but what that does is it sets off a cascade that can actually reverse, and this has been shown in research, reverse plaque formation. So those plaques, those lipids that have been deposited inside of those foam cells in the intimal medial wall of the vessel, those can be mobilized, taken out, put back into circulation. They go to the hepatocytes, and if you're activating these systems correctly, it will then be utilized as fuel. So you can actually turn those mechanisms backwards, and they've actually shown to have beneficial effects with regard to LP little a, which again, I won't go off on a too much of a tangent about the difference between looking at just LDL and VLDL levels and then ignoring LP little a, because inflammation and inappropriate lipid management is really the problem for those patients. It's not, LDL is not the demon that we've made it out to be. It's really just a part of this puzzle. But you're looking at an agent in hexarelin that can activate and do all of the growth hormone mechanisms while supporting cardiovascular system, including, and specifically a great use case is somebody who's had an MI. So it prevents reperfusion injury that happens to the heart muscle after there's been an MI that's happened in somebody who has heart failure. So decreased left ventricular injection fraction, it boosts that LVEF back up while protecting the heart at the same time. Because what you don't want to do is to take a damaged muscle and ask it to work harder just to have more output, but cause it to be metabolically sick at the same time. So this is promoting that contractility while preserving its function and helping its myocytes to repair themselves. So this one, I love I think that this is really sort of one of those future medicines, and these mechanisms are getting elucidated in science and research. And this is the next wave of how we're going to look at lipid management, in my opinion.
Well, and I think that's probably one of the things we need to have you back on for, Brandon, because as most people know here, my LP little a is 4 times the high end of the range.
Right.
I've been using a PCSK9 inhibitor. You obviously know this. It's impaired my insulin sensitivity, blood sugar runs high, all these different things, right? And
Mhm.
this is something that you've been talking to me about. Hey, maybe we should use this. And I think that's probably something you and I need to get together on and then do a podcast on it, talk
Yep.
about the results. We don't have a lot of time left here. I do want to throw something else at you. So
Okay.
for our listeners, we'll just use me as an example. All right. Everyone wants to be lean and muscular. They want to be fat, PHAT.
That's
Is
right.
there any, is there it's hard to say this, right? Because you see people as patients, right? You can't just throw stacks out there. Like, I know that's easy for people to do, but if you could recommend something that's going to help people be as lean and muscular as possible, what would be a starting stack that you can recommend? Obviously, I know you need to talk to each person as a patient, right? But what's a common good way to stack some of these peptides?
Sure. So yes, it's obviously very nuanced, and I'll do my best to answer the question. So again, assuming we've got the big three in place, right? That they're exercising, they're sleeping, and
Yeah.
nutrition's dialed in. So if they are a patient who has decreased hormone output, so that's something that needs to be in place as well. Otherwise, we're going to be driving. You're pushing that boulder up a much steeper and much higher hill
Yeah.
uh, if you don't have that in place, just like the other three. If you've got somebody who, it depends on where they're at too. It's very context based. So I have somebody who's very insulin resistant, and as a result, their balance mechanisms of anabolism and catabolism are not favorable. They're not going to utilize substrates appropriately. I'm going to want to work on that part of it. And
Right.
there's a variety of different ways you can do it. It was just, sort of genetic dependence. If somebody's had pancreatitis before, that's going to change my opinion. If they've got liver enzymes that have been elevated in the past, if their liver system is very sensitive, that may change it as well. But so from that perspective, this is something where you think of, if I had to add one thing to the things that I've just mentioned, it would be that secretagogue class. Because really you're activating so many different tissues and in a way that our body recognizes how to utilize it. It would definitely be that class. So like a tesamorelin, for instance, for the
Yeah.
body comp changes that you're looking for, that one is very impactful. You're getting a pretty significant growth hormone release. You're getting about 170% of your normal endogenous production. Or let me put it this way, the normal endogenous production of somebody in their 25 to 40-year-old range, right? So that's important because if they're 65, I don't want just 170% of what they've been producing. I want it to be more like that younger individual. Um, the reality too, which is important, is you think like, well, can my body make this? This has actually been studied. These secretagogues have been tested in 80 and 90-year-olds, and those patients' ability to produce growth hormone remains. So they do have a good capacity, even in that elderly population, of getting that growth hormone pulse back. But again, without the same, like the nuances of giving, and this is true in research, which drives me crazy, they look at growth hormone as a potentially negative problem or that there's going to be cancer promoted as a result of it. That has
Yeah.
never been elucidated in research, not once. And
Mhm.
they've actually studied secretagogues in patients who have pituitary tumors. So they still have a tumor in the pituitary, in the tissue that's making these things, and it does not promote recurrence. They
Interesting.
are very safe. But if you look at literature, because standard medicine looks at what is FDA approved, what are these things? Now, tesamorelin is FDA approved, actually, but they typically talk about it from exogenous growth hormone, which has negative health side effects, and you're not going to want to use it for very long. So that's really held research back, in my opinion, in this regard. But again, so that was a long and long-winded answer to that short question, but I guess if I had to pin it down, testosterone in the context of those other things would be the next most powerful agent.
Interesting. Lisa, do you have any follow-up questions? This has been a
No,
heck of a
I loved this little case study there at the end, and I think for a future episode we should do like several case studies where you're like, oh, okay, this could work for this and that person. But I'm gonna listen to this episode as well, even just because it was basically a master class on peptides. So thank you for that, Brandon.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you all ever want to get a hold of Brandon, you can check out the show notes. His contact information is there. Or if you want to send us emails on topics, questions, anything, just hit pause, check out the show notes. All the information is there. Brandon, thank you so much for coming on. We're going to have you back on, maybe some different topics, maybe even a roundtable with you and Jordan, a Premier U roundtable.
great.
And for those of you that want to come to the Fat Muscle event, that will be next July. I know that's a ways off, but I'm going to keep telling people about it because you are not going to want to miss this. So I know we also have some stuff coming up. If you don't mind, talk about what we have coming up this year with Bill Campbell and how we are tied to him and what he's doing in the menopause side of things. Do you mind talking about that real quick
Right.
before we jump off?
Absolutely. Yeah, so very grateful to be a part of that. So we're going to be basically providing clinical data to support these outcome measures that he's looking for. So essentially these trained individuals with HRT, obviously the HRT is being managed from our side. And it'll be interesting to see too, what other facets could be at play. Obviously, we'll be doing data collection in a very large sense with that, but our team is going to be providing this sort of clinical care that is underlying these questions that he's asking basically through this research.
Yeah, I am excited to, this is something we'll look back on, 5, 10 years from now. And to be part of that is just huge. So this has been a long episode. We appreciate everyone who listens from myself, Lisa, and Brandon. We're out of here. See you guys.